Salutations, fellow nerds. I'm Rick Y, and today is November 17th, 2025. Last night, Donald Trump sent out a slew of social media posts claiming he supports the House voting on the Epstein files. Now, there's a reason for that, and I'll get into it in a second, but something else is happening under the surface, something I'm starting to see more clearly, a familiar rhythm in the soundtrack of human history. Because this is not the first time America has actually lived through this particular kind of political fracture. So let's first talk about Trump's apparent 180 on voting to release the Epstein files. Personally, I'm torn between two possibilities. Option A, he has a slimy, underhanded strategy to make sure that we never see these files. Or option B, he suddenly decided to open his heart and tell the truth. And here's why it's option A. He directed the Attorney General to open an investigation into all of this, targeting only Democrats. Put a pin in it. Putting aside the absurdity of how many times the president has directed the Attorney General to investigate people, that's also a good defense move, because if the House votes to release these files and somehow the Senate has a miraculous change of heart as well, it still ends up on Trump's desk for a veto. But even if Congress overrides that veto, he still has his escape hatch of going, well, now there's an ongoing DOJ investigation, so we can't release any evidence. It's the same play he used for his taxes. I'll release them when the audit is done. The audit that still hasn't been done for over a decade. Trump has built such a tight cocoon around himself with his DOJ that he has vaccinated himself against legal transparency. So I want to let you all down easy. We're not seeing these files under this president. He's shown that pattern before. At least not anything that directly implicates him. What I did not foresee was the rift forming inside MAGA itself, a rift that the Epstein controversy is pouring gasoline upon, and that brings us to the historical rhyme that I mentioned earlier. Walk with me for a second. By the late 1960s, the South was disproportionately supplying infantry for Vietnam. Working-class Southern families felt used as cannon fodder, ignored by DC elites, and betrayed by a war that they admittedly didn't believe in. When the Democratic Party fractured over Vietnam, a war that they escalated, Republicans stepped in and said, "You know, Washington is out of touch with your values. We hear you." They don't. At the same time, the federal government had ended segregation, sent troops to enforce integration, expanded voting rights, and launched huge social programs under LBJ. Many white Southerners felt that the government was imposing morality upon them. States' rights became the political mask for racial resentment. And economically, the South was shifting from small agrarian towns into more urban industrial spaces. And that meant cultural change, outsiders moving in, rising black political power, and declining local control. Republicans saw an opening and promised to return to tradition, stability, and low taxes. A message that fit neatly over racial resentment without voters having to say race was their motivation out loud. The game that has been played basically my entire life at this point. And then came the rise of conservative Christianity, school prayer, abortion, family values, fear of secularism. The Democrats leaned towards secular pluralism, while the GOP declared itself the home of Christian America, and again coded racial undertones, especially in private Christian schools, but framed as moral issues. And then, of course, came class resentment. To many white Southerners, Democrats looked too academic, too wealthy, too disconnected, and too friendly with anti-war protesters and counterculture. Images from the admittedly chaotic 1968 Democratic Convention were political poison. Republicans swooped in with law and order, and into this world stepped George Wallace. George Wallace was the segregationist poster boy of the 1960s, a Southern governor who looked at the civil rights movement with the same disdain that I typically reserve for pistachio-flavored ice cream. His whole shtick was built on telling angry white voters that elites, black activists, and outside agitators were destroying their way of life. He literally stood in the schoolhouse doorway blocking black students until JFK had to send in the National Guard to physically move him. He turned racism into a brand, he packaged it as states' rights, and built a movement out of fear. Then in 1972, while running for president as the law and order guy, Wallace was shot 5 times. He survived, but then he was paralyzed from the waist down. Presidential run was over. And then came the pivot. Wallace started apologizing in black churches, asking for forgiveness, trying basically to rebrand. Some believed him, others saw survival instinct. The civil rights era had passed him by. He served one final term as Alabama governor in the 80s as a quieter, diminished man, and by the time he died in 1998, his legacy was clear. He built a movement out of grievance, fear, and resentment. And that brings us to today's remix artist of that same ugly music, Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is basically the Zoomer era remix of every white nationalist who ever touched a webcam. He started as a teenage conservative commentator during the Trump 2016 wave. He got fired from The Blaze from being too racist for Glenn Beck, which is a feat. Then he built a following on YouTube ranting about white identity, Christian nationalism, and how women having rights ruined civilization. As he leaned harder into Holocaust denial and open white supremacy, every major platform banned him. YouTube, Twitter, Airbnb, and freaking Lego conventions didn't even want him around. So he moved to streaming on fringe sites and branded his followers as the Groyper Army, which is basically incels with a mascot. It's the same group of people with whom I originally and continue to believe from where Charlie Kirk's assassin hails. There really isn't anything to suggest otherwise since they've gone radio silent the second they caught him. Had they further reason to believe their predetermined conclusions, we probably would have had it leaked to us by now, but I digress. Fuentes has also cozied up to Kanye West during Ye's open anti-Semitism spiral, ended up in the Oval Office with Trump in 2022 and immediately bragged about it like a kid who got to sit in a fire truck one time. Since then, his entire brand has been trying to radicalize disaffected young men by telling them that they're victims of feminism, immigrants, Jews, and modern society in general. Unlike old school racists like George Wallace, who wanted political power, Fuentes openly pushes accelerationism, collapse the system, install a white Christian authoritarianism ethno-state, and call it a day. Fuentes is basically the digital age Wallace with accelerationism baked in. Racism is the core, but it's wrapped in grievance politics. You see, George Wallace had states' rights and freedom and tyranny, while Fuentes espouses demographics and Christian nationalism and family values, or just saying what others won't. Both sell themselves as champions of the real people. Wallace targeted ignored white Southerners. Fuentes is targeting abandoned young white men who feel betrayed by feminists, globalists, and the GOP establishment. Both have weaponized cultural anxiety. While Wallace attacked integration, feminism, protesters, courts, Fuentes attacks multiculturalism, LGBTQ people, feminism, immigration, secularism, and tech platforms. Both frame themselves as rebels taking on the entire system. Both recruit disaffected young men. Both claim to be victims while simultaneously punching down. Both push the Overton window through deliberate shock and awe rhetoric. But there is one critical difference. Wallace wanted power. Fuentes wants collapse. Wallace wanted the governorship and the presidency. He wanted to own or at least run the system. Fuentes wants to destroy the system and rebuild a white Christian authoritarian ethno-state. Wallace was a segregationist populist. Fuentes is an accelerationist white nationalist. But the lineage, rhetorically, is a straight line. But if you fast forward to the current moment and why it's dangerous, with the Epstein files fueling anger inside MAGA, with prices rising while voters are told they're falling, with people kind of feeling like Trump is pissing down their backs and telling them it's raining, Fuentes is seeing a chance. There's no Vietnam today, but there is exhaustion over Zionism, Gaza, war, and hypocrisy. And Fuentes exploits that to build credibility with the disillusioned. And here's the part that I keep warning about. The biggest threat to Trump isn't the Democrats. It's scorned MAGA voters. Fuentes knows it, Thomas Massie knows it, and Marjorie Taylor Greene knows it. And they're seizing a power vacuum that Democrats in Congress just don't seem enthusiastic to fill. And if you don't see the danger, you're not paying attention. Hatred and fear are jet fuel for people like Nick Fuentes. He is the loudest hydrant spraying that poison into the political ecosystem. And the best antidote is to learn about the cultures, histories, and human beings that he tells you to hate. That's what I'm here to do. He's not a source of truth. He's a salesman for resentment. When the people carrying out a genocide, the United States and IDF, try to convince you the victims are the violent ones, the Palestinian children and families being ripped apart by our military machines, maybe, just maybe, it's time to open our eyes. Could we be on the precipice of a new Dixiecrat Southern strategy where the angry and disillusioned begin turning on the hands that fed them for so long? Tell me what you think about in the comments below. Anyway, don't be a stranger, and y'all come back now. You hear?